Nimona is thematically about being queer in a queer-phobic world. While this somewhat recently released animated feature is, on paper, a narrative about societal outcasts trying to survive in a world that's persecuting them, it is overall not very difficult to draw an equivalence between how these characters are treated in the film and how queer people are discriminated against in real life by both power structures that keep queer people marginalized and assholes who revel in their bigotry, like a pig rolling in its own filth, or me rolling around in Monopoly money pretending that it's real money, because that's the only way I'll experience success. And with that, Nimona has clear parallels with the LGBTQ experience, ones that I personally related to. See, I am a trans woman. Don't know if I've mentioned that in my videos before, like a million times, and I very strongly related to Nimona's story, characters, and themes, even though on a literal level, the film's narrative isn't technically about being gay or trans. If anything, it's just a movie that resonated with me and other queer folks by being comparable to our lived experiences, because truly, there are just many commonalities between our lives and the journeys that these characters undergo in the film. These similarities can be seen from the story itself. The plot is set in a medieval futuristic fantasy society and follows Ballister Boldheart, a commoner who is about to be knighted by the Queen. Once knighted, he would serve the Institute of Elite Knights, i.e. this sci-fi fantasy kingdom's government and basically law enforcement. And as a newly minted knight, Ballister will be the first commoner to be knighted by the Institute, something that unfortunately causes great consternation in the kingdom, because, you know, citizens question his worthiness and such. And these concerns become fully realized when Ballister is publicly framed for the murder of the Queen, a scene that Ballister flees from and thus goes into hiding. Once at his hideout, he is discovered by Nimona, a shape-shifting being who rejects the Institute's authority and doctrine and is willing to be Ballister's sidekick, to which Ballister reluctantly agrees. And from there, the two try to clear Ballister's name by investigating who framed him and why. Nimona, the movie, is framed as an LGBTQ allegory within the first few minutes. In fact, the movie introduces its LGBTQ themes early on by showcasing a romantic entanglement between our main protagonist Ballister and Ambrosius Goldenloin, i.e. two male characters. And upon being introduced to Nimona, the character, Nimona states that she does not identify as people, because they are a shape-shifting being and they become who they choose, which could be a human girl, a rhinoceros, or whatever. Because, you know, being a human girl is just one of her forms. And honestly, Nimona overall not identifying with people is thematically relatable to trans and non-binary folks, mostly because Nimona's personal identity rejects societal typicalcy of what a living being can be, which is something that she shares with the lived experiences of real-life trans people who also reject pre-established notions of what a person is quote-unquote supposed to be, but with the difference that Nimona does this as a shapeshifter, whereas trans and non-binary people in real life challenge pre-established gender norms. And if anything, as a character, Nimona is just really synonymous with the transgender experience here. Furthermore, Nimona is a shapeshifter, a superpower that trans people gravitate towards because, if we attained it, it's a power that would allow us to shift our body to one that is more comfortable for us. I mean, to be honest, it's a power that I always gravitated towards in media, especially in X-Men, because, you know, Mystique, the best mutant. Shapeshifting is just awesome. And while Nimona loves the act of transformation for the sake of transformation itself, rather than finding a form that she is more comfortable in alone, shapeshifting itself is a superpower that many trans people wish that they had, because I know I do. And with that, as a result of Ballister's queer love interest, Nimona's personal identity, and Nimona's shape-shifting power set, this all lays the groundwork for ensuring that Nimona, the movie, is an LGBTQ film and features a conflict that has many parallels with queer identity in real life. Yes, even though the Institute is not technically battling against Ballister and Nimona for reasons involving LGBTQ identity. Instead, the Institute is going against these characters because Ballister and Nimona are living examples that subvert the Institute's doctrine, which blends government and religious policy. In fact, the Institute overall views Ballister as a heretic, and they pervade Nimona as a monster, because obviously from a perspective of something that's non-trans positive, shape-shifting superpowers are often portrayed as being inherently deceptive rather than affirming. And for that, the Institute is an entity that pervades Ballister and Nimona as being lesser, which, you know, is very relatable to how religious zealots and political fearmongers stigmatize LGBTQ people in real life, because unless you've been living under a rock, LGBTQ people have been vilified as of late, even to the point of people even equating us to groomers and sexual predators. In fact, the rhetoric and the resulting policy has gotten more than a bit ugly, and I personally know ugly. I've seen what I look like in the morning before I've had my coffee. It's not peak Riley. And overall, Nimona's conflict captures this salient queer narrative and thematic point, because just like in the real world, the religious and government institutions present in Nimona target our heroes under justifications that are eerily similar to how queer people are demonized in reality. It's just sadly all too understandable. Additionally, Nimona and Ballister embody two different styles of queer personal states. On Nimona's side, she is someone who has been comfortable being herself for many years, and on Ballister's end, he's a person who is learning the ropes and is slowly but surely realizing how his society fails people that it deems to be different. They both overall go on two different journeys, but to start, let's discuss the character of Nimona. Similar to many queer people who have been out of the closet for many a year, Nimona sees the world for what it is. It's corrupt, and it wields its power like a cudgel against those it designates to be monsters, i.e. beings like Nimona. And as a result, this has taken a toll on Nimona's psyche. And while deep down, Nimona is a sweet and good being and has a really awesome superpower that allows her to transform into other animals like sharks, whales, and other cool fantastical beasts, unfortunately, this shit world has put the hurt on her. The constant ostracization, the marginalization, and being labeled as the other pains Nimona, resulting in her having to hide her vulnerabilities under a very dark sense of humor, though of course as a viewer, Nimona's comedy about death and murder is admittedly very amusing, as well as being the reason as to why she seeks out Ballister, i.e. the kingdom's public enemy number one, because honestly, in this fantasy world, Ballister may as well be John Dillinger. And Nimona seeks out Ballister because she is lonely, and maybe, just maybe, the realm's most hated person could be the rarest human of them all, a person who can see Nimona as a valid being, a societal outcast who can support another societal outcast, someone that is willing to be Nimona's friend. And as a trans person, I feel that in my soul. Like, speaking as a trans person in real life, or at least I hope this is real life, because if not, I have a lot of questions. Trans people receive so much damn bullshit, and the rhetoric, especially in 2023, is alarming and exhausting. Hell, we can't even go a single day without some prominent asshole spewing their ignorance and hatred to the world. And you know, I try to be proud of myself and surround myself with supportive people, but this assault on our personage, both in terms of the dialogue and government policy, it wears on me. Like Nimona, I hide my vulnerabilities behind a dark sense of humor and find community in people who have likewise been designated as the other. But unfortunately, that just does not stop how isolating it can feel when bigot dipshits, both with and without power, debate the very existence of our identities daily. It's tiring. And Nimona, the movie, captures the essence of that internal conflict through Nimona, the character. While Nimona is strong and confident in herself and her values, she is overall still in a lot of pain. After all, Nimona has to live in a world that labels her as a monster, which simultaneously causes her to feel sequestered from the rest of the population, all while craving to find someone, anyone, to accept her for who she is. Because for fuck's sake, can someone be Nimona's friend? Fantasy Jesus, my heart just hurts for her, because damn, I can really relate. On the other side of things, Ballister has an equally queer character arc that is also more than a bit different than Nimona's. See, where Nimona embraces her queer adjacent chaotic energy, Ballister is initially reluctant to let go of his old world view, the one where the Institute are the good guys and that monsters are inherently evil. Yes, even though the Institute has designated him to be an enemy of the state, because you know, old beliefs die hard. Yet throughout the movie, Ballister slowly but surely realizes the truth. He begins to question the Institute's core tenets and why it harms those it deems different. He begins to realize that the Institute teaches deceptive propaganda meant to vilify folks that it views as undesirable, that the Institute is a power structure built on a lie. This realization is very similar to other movies and stories with LGBTQ and trans allegories. After all, many trans-themed stories, like say The Matrix, feature a main character who confronts the fact that their existence is based on a false understanding of reality. And Ballister shares a commonality with that character building journey. Because if you think about it, Ballister and Neo's realization about the real nature of the world is very similar due to how they have to reckon with the fact that their whole worldview was based on bullshit. And honestly, there's a reason why so many trans and queer themed stories stories like Nimona and like The Matrix have this type of narrative wrinkle, and that reason is due to how trans people can easily relate to it. Like, speaking for myself, I was taught that imagining myself as the opposite gender was gay, and that being gay was akin to being something shameful. And from there, everything I learned growing up reinforced this awful worldview, whether through political rhetoric, religious creeds, an education system that neglected to teach me about what it meant to be gay or trans, pop culture that mocked or vilified queer people, and social scenarios that referred to queer people in the negative. I was inundated with homophobic and transphobic propaganda growing up, all before I was confronted by the fact that these were lies meant to stigmatize people like me, meant to inflict pain. And in Nimona, Ballister endures a similar wake-up call, that the Institute and its morals were wrong. So yeah, I really relate to Nimona for obvious reasons. It's an LGBTQ story through and through, and arrived at a relevant moment in queer history where homophobia and transphobia are on the rise again. It just hit me where I lived, and as a result, I clicked with Nimona. It's a movie that champions the importance of having love for oneself despite being a societal outcast, and persevering through bigoted bullshit, because despite the hatred, despite the ignorance, we as people are valid. Because whether we are talking about being trans or fantastical shape-shifting beings, we are all worthy as people.